All right, today we're going to take a look at translating algebraic expressions. So basically taking sentences that are written out and making math problems out of them based on keywords. Some vocabulary that's going to be helpful for you to know. So a variable is something that represents an unknown. So we don't know the value, or it's that the value can change. And so because it can vary or change, we use typically a letter to represent that in our expressions and our equations, but it could be a symbol and things like that too. When we are talking about expressions and equations, we also have a term that are things that are called a constant. They are a value that is fixed or set, basically the opposite of a variable, meaning that they do not actually change at any time. And then within an expression or an equation, we have what are called terms. And terms are basically a number, a variable, or the product of numbers and variables in an expression. These are always going to be separated by an addition or a subtraction sign. All right, so let's look at some examples. So this here, 2x plus 3y minus 5, is an example of an expression. And it's an expression and an equation because it doesn't have an equal sign. So that's kind of the difference between an expression and an equation. So all of these, so 2x, 3y, and that 5, these are all the terms. So in this case, we have 3 terms in our expression. X and y stand for those unknown quantities, so those are our variables. Since 5 does not have a variable with it, this is a constant. Now you might be asking, what about the 2 and the 3? Because those are also numbers. So the 2 and the 3, and we didn't put that in the vocabulary, and I should have, these are what are called coefficients. So a coefficient is basically a number in front of a variable or multiplied by a variable. Like here, so this would mean 2 times x. And as we're starting to work through this, we really want to work on not using x for multiplication, because as you can see, x is used as a variable. And if we use x for multiplication, it would look really confusing because it would look something like this. And then people wouldn't exactly know what you mean. So either want to use the dots, or we can use parentheses, things like that. Or when it's a case of a number and a variable, we just write them right next to each other. All right, so we are going to start off with, what are some keywords that you can use that might be in a sentence that would indicate addition? So some of those keywords would be things like the sum, more than, increased by, total, plus, or all together. So if you see any of these keywords, and there might be a few more, these usually indicate that we would use addition in our expression. For example, here we have 5 more than a number. Since we see more than is one of our addition terms, we're going to take that 5. What this means is we have 5 more than, so plus a number. Now we don't know what the number is, so we use a variable. In this case, I'm going to use n, but it could be any variable unless it states in the problem which variable you should use. All right, once again, we have increased by. So here, this would be a number. So this time we don't know what the number is, so I'm going to use n. increased by 2. All right, so let's move on to subtraction. So keywords that we might use for subtraction. We might see the word difference. We might see the word minus. We might see decreased by. We might also see less than or subtracted from. Now, with these two in particular, these are what are called our kind of probably the most confusing ones. They're like our Uno reverse. And when you see these, we're actually going to reverse the order that the items are written. Okay, so let's look at an example of that. So here we see 3 less than a number. Since less than falls into this reverse the order, what that means here is even though the 3 comes first, we are going to switch the order. So here this becomes actually a number minus 3. If you ever get confused, a good way to do this is put a number in and say, what would be 3 less than 10? Well, if you were trying to figure out 3 less than 10, you would do 10 minus 3. And so that's why the number would come first. So 3 less than 10 would be 7. All right, on our next one, we have 10 minus a number. Since that's not one of our reverses, this just becomes 10 minus n.
And this is Miss Whitney.
All right, now let's look at some key terms for multiplication. Key terms for multiplication would include times, product, twice, maybe double or triple. Also the word of, like when we did half of something, remember we were multiplying those fractions, and then per. All right, so now we'll see we have the product of a number and 3. So since we're doing product, a number and 3, this is one of those interesting situations. So with multiplication, the number is always going to come first. So even though it's a product of a number and 3, we would write it as 3n. And notice I did not put any space between the 3 and the variable. We just write those right up next to each other. And then the next one, 6 times a number, becomes 6n. All right, and now division. Division has the least amount of words that we probably would use. Things like divided by, quotient. Sometimes if we see the terms half or third, although those can kind of go back and forth because if you use the number half, but half could mean divided by 2. And then also separate, because whenever we're splitting or like split would all mean division. So here the quotient of a number and 3, I'm going to really encourage us to get in the habit of writing our division in fraction form. So we would put a number over 3, and this means the number divided by 3. And then the next one, since it's 12 divided by a number, we would actually put the 12 on top, so it would be 12 divided by n. So on all of these, it's typically going to be in the order that it's written. Now, these are all examples where there's just one operation going on. That is not always the case. Sometimes you'll get more complicated phrases like this. 3 times the sum of a number and 2. So for this problem, we see that it says both times and sum. Because this is 3 times the sum, what this means is the multiplication or that the sum has to come before the multiplication because it's multiplying by the answer of the addition problem. And so in order to get addition to come before multiplication, we have to put that in parentheses. So what it would look like is 3 times the sum, so 3 parentheses, and then we have a number and 2, so that sum is going to go where the and is, and so it's going to be the number plus 2. So this would be how we would write 3 times the sum of a number and 2.